Connected Consumer. Hello, Connected Consumers. We have a special episode here today. It's just me hosting without your beloved Rosie, so apologies to everyone who tuned in just for her. But you do have some special treats here in the sense that we have more Parks Associates colleagues than usual. I have some of my colleagues from the research team, and we're here to recap some of the best findings and the best conversations and the best experiences that we had at the recent Connections conference. If you don't know, Connections is our major flagship event that we have each year. It's the 26th annual convention, was on May 17th through 19th. It's been in other locations historically, but this time we had it at the Star in Texas, which is where the Dallas Cowboys practice, really right next to the field where the Dallas Cowboys practice. It was really neat. There's a really nice hotel there that we had a conference in, and we didn't encounter any football players face to face, although some people did see Dak Prescott walking around in street clothes down on the field. I did not get to go talk to him, and he did not come and talk about smart home devices, but he was technically there. So I like to think that Dak Prescott was at Connections. Jen, has there ever been a star NFL quarterback at Connections in the past? What have the other conferences been like?
Hey, Chris. Not to my knowledge. So, hey, everyone, thanks for listening. I'm Jennifer Kent with Parks and the Vice President of the Market Research Group here.
I was so pleased with my funny segue that I didn't introduce you. I'm very sorry
you
about
didn't
that.
introduce any of us, so I thought we could just do it as we jump in.
Yeah,
That's
fine. It's not a
that's
best
okay.
practice by me, but you're doing great.
You don't need to have all the jobs. We can introduce ourselves. So
Thanks.
no worries. So yeah, have not ever, to my knowledge, had NFL players. Actually we had this one little side room where we were storing our stuff. And one time I went in there and the kickers were practicing. And my husband, who's a big Cowboys fan, I am an Eagles fan, so it pains me a little bit. But he was like, they need to be practicing. Dallas Cowboys have a long history with terrible kickers. So he's happy to hear that. But yeah, this is our 26th annual Connections event. So we've been doing this a long time. It really is the executive conference for folks playing in the smart home. You know, when the conference started 26 years ago, it was really focused on the home network, which was a relatively new concept, right? And what computing and home networking can mean in the home. And what the technology and the use cases and making things work together. I mean, really, really innovative stuff. And it still is, really. I mean, we're talking about emerging consumer tech. And the thing I loved about it, honestly, is this it's the distance makes the heart grow fonder effect of us being virtual the past 2 years and not being able to have it as our flagship conference. We have other conference series, of course, as well. And being back with everybody in the industry was just so fantastic. There were also people that we got to meet virtually over the past few years who have been speakers as part of our virtual event series, or we've just worked with, right, in with research or what have you, that I didn't even realize I hadn't met in person yet because I've seen them so much virtually. And we're like, oh, here we are in person. I mean, you really can't replace that like one-to-one connection. I mean, that's really what the conference is all about. It's called Connections, right? So we're sharing our research with the industry and then bringing industry leaders on stage to really tell us what they're struggling with, what are they doing, what new areas are they exploring, and really benefiting from a lot of that kind of cross-industry talk, taking a couple of days out of your day-to-day and developing that product or that service that you're focused on, and a lot of networking to make those great things happen. And just, you know, we've seen over the years so many deals and partnerships, right? And acquisitions sometimes happen at our conferences, and I'm just so happy we're back.
Yeah, it was really nice. It created a lot of that situation where you're trying to decide like how well do we know each other? I've decided we're friends. Usually this is the way it works for me, is I've decided we're friends because we've had a couple of meetings and I've like seen your dog in the background or whatever. And then
Right.
people are like, no, I'm being professional. I'm going to introduce myself to you. I'm like, okay,
Right.
that's fine. Someday you'll catch up and you'll realize that we're friends. That's what I always like to think.
Right. By the time you
Kristen,
leave
what did you think?
Connection, you're
Yeah,
friends.
that's true. and people have some glasses of wine and some hors d'oeuvres, and maybe things get a little easier, little more familiar. So, Ms. Kristen, how did you find this experience? And also introduce yourself, since I, again, just segued without introducing you.
Sure. So I'm Kristen Hanich, a research director here at Parks. I've been here for about 7 years. I cover the broadband and mobility spaces as well as healthcare. So I get to attend a lot of Parks events. At least back when we were in person, I was almost the whole full circuit. So I have a lot of experience to compare this to. I know a lot of people were really happy with the new Dallas location. It's a little bit more convenient for different companies who may be located in the East or Midwest. So the time zone changes more with them. Normally we're over in California. So I've heard lots of good things about the location, lots of good things about the food, especially.
Yeah, people did love the food. It was good, but I was also, I mean, what I was thinking, Paul, tell me if I'm right about this. At other conferences, it's super hard to get food. You have to really super stand in line. So the fact that we had it kind of available, we had little tables everywhere where you could get snacks and stuff. It was like a lot about the convenience. It was not just the quality of the food, right?
Yes. So I don't know if I segue into myself. Well, okay. So let me introduce myself. So I'm Paul Erickson. I'm a research director focusing on entertainment and consumer electronics at Parks, and I've been around the industry a long time. So hence why Chris is asking me for some perspective. And I think, yeah, when we look at these other events, and a lot of the majority of my event diet in former lives was really towards these massive events, right? CES, NAB, Mobile World Congress, IFA in Germany. And the food is, unless you're lucky enough to be at a reception, you really are battling the rest of the massive attendee base to get access to food, right? So it's big lines, it's a rush. And if you think about airports these days, when it's rush hour and it's a big line to get food, that's kind of how it is at other conferences. So it's much more haphazard, and this at Connections, it was much less stressful overall, and the food was good, right? You're not just grabbing whatever fast food is there from a vendor that you can grab it from because it has the least long line. Uh, it was very convenient, and it was good food, so I give high marks on both.
Yeah, it was nice to be able to sit down and share a meal with these people that, again, to Jen's point, that you've been mostly meeting virtually. So not only was it sort of nice that it was available, but also having some nice seating and stuff. It was a nice mix of, I think, kind of being sufficiently large that there was a lot of people to meet with, and also small enough to be intimate and allow for kind of some deeper conversations to happen, for people to kind of mix and mingle comfortably.
Of course,
Yeah,
the name of the event is Connections for I think a very good reason. It's all about forging those.
yeah, and I think one other contrast that I'll give compared to some of the huge events that I had been to in the past is that a lot of them are huge, and the base is very broad, right? Not just the people who are speaking, but also those who are attending. And what struck me is Connections was a much smaller, more compact, certainly more convenient, but also very focused event that catered to and focused on decision makers. So both as attendees and panelists and keynotes, delivering insights from that decision maker perspective, right? So C-suite, VP, director, and so on. And so during the networking as well, the conversations were different. So versus the more general conversations or quote unquote water cooler talk, that's an outdated term these days. But versus the more general blah blah blah, if you will, that takes on its own life at receptions at a lot of these larger traditional conferences. Here, is much more focused and business driven, and not every conversation is business driven, of course, but the tenor of it and just the frequency of it was noticeable. So you had a lot more people there that were focusing on, if not doing business, at least talking shop about certain issues in the business, that you would not otherwise hear, because you've got, let's say, a VP of something at a particular company talking to somebody else who is, a director of some initiative at another company, and the conversations they're having are different from, let's say, at a more general event where you might have two engineers talking, or you might have an engineer talking to, field sales representative. And so they've got a very different conversation there. And so I appreciated that it was much more focused and business driven. And it was very interesting to see, and kind of impressive and good to know that, Parks has that influence and currency with executives in the industry at that level.
Yeah, and in addition to all of the great conversations that we had, we also did the kind of typical conference panels and presentations mixed in there. I was pretty happy with how they went this time around. I guess this is my third in-person event in recent history, so I'm starting to be able to compare and contrast a little bit. But definitely the conversations were good compared to, I don't know, I guess all the virtual conferences and everything too. We had a good lineup in the different panels, so I was hoping to kind of go around and ask people about the panels that they moderated, some kind of favorite takeaways, and hit on those just so people have a sense of what the different panels and keynote conversations are about.
Okay, I had some great panels. Start off in our workshop. So one thing that's kind of unique about our events is that we always have a half-day workshop before we launch into the main event, where we're sharing a lot of our own data and research. So I'll share a little bit about that. And then I had panels related to broadband and connectivity in the home, big panel on interoperability and platforms. Also talked about health and some interesting health use cases and the rise of connected health devices in the home. But love to start with just sharing, at least with our listeners, a little bit from what we did share in the workshop, which is really the state of the smart home as seen through our survey work. So as I know, Chris, I'm sure, has shared in previous podcasts, Parks Associates does survey 10,000 US internet households every quarter. And twice a year, we're going really deep on smart home, residential security. We hit home energy management as well within that, and some other topics. And so, we shared with our audience that, every business and consumer, right, has been through a lot over the past couple of years, but the smart home industry is strong and it has grown through all of that. When we look at all of our core metrics, whether it be the percent of households owning a smart home device, the percentage of households buying a device in the past 12 months, those and their intentions to continue to buy, everything continues to be up. So 37% of US internet households do own a smart home device as of Q4 2021, and that is up from 29% pre-pandemic. So certainly businesses were still operating even with, economic volatility, supply chain issues, staffing shortages, and consumers were, continuing to buy. And if we look at the broader connected home landscape, including computing, mobile, entertainment devices, smart TVs, streaming media players, connected health, on average, US internet households tell us that they have about 16 connected devices, and in some households, it's much higher. Obviously, that's just the average. And then among households that do have at least one smart home device, the average now is 8. So it's 3 smart home devices for all households, but if you're already in the smart home game, you have on average 8 devices. And so what that has meant for the industry is a couple different things. First of all, there are some new households getting into it. So a lot of households rebuying, right? Households that get smart home and like the experience buying new devices. But also comes with a big fragmentation issue and a big issue of how all of these devices can work together and how to really give the consumer a unified experience that they're getting the most out of their devices. I mean, a lot of the promise of smart home is how these things work together, what automations and routines and what jobs can it take off my plate, right? Like being a really actual smart and actually helpful and valuable addition to my life, and not just put more jobs on me. And so our platforms panel talked about that a lot. The word of the day, Chris, you're gonna have to stop me so I can just like go on forever. But I'll just say one last thing and then tell me if you want me to go somewhere else. But is that like the word of the conference was interoperability. we talked about the problem and opportunity, the problem of interoperability and the opportunity to solve interoperability so much that we banned it on the third day, and Chris started referring it to it as the I word. He was like, the I word we will not mention, right? It's like it's on everybody's thoughts and minds, and it's just been an issue since the beginning of the industry. 26 years ago, when we had our first connections, we were talking about it, and Trisha Parks founded this company 36 years ago, and she was talking about interoperability back then, right? The home is such a complicated landscape, and there's so many great manufacturers coming from every different area: energy, lighting, locks, appliances, robots, lawnmowers, right? That could be connected, and how do you make these things work together? So there is, a standard out there that's being developed at the application layer. It's IP based, called Matter. We talked a lot about that. Tech giants are supporting it, which is really critical for any new standard, protocol to succeed. There's a lot of hope in it, but also skepticism and sort of based in reality. It's any new standard, even if Matter can help solve the interoperability issue, there's going to be years before a lot of the products that are Matter supporting make it to market, and there's enough of a landscape out there where they work together. And so how does business continue to operate? How do we design products and services that are the best experience that can possibly be for the user in the meantime, right? So let me stop there. But I got really excited about that panel. It was a fantastic panel. We had speakers. We had Mitch Klein from the Z-Wave Alliance, long, veteran in the industry, talking about Z-Wave support for Matter and what his perspectives are there. We also had Tuya, a big, huge platform with hundreds of millions of devices on their platform, Brevo, the Synaptics DSP group, and Constellation, all on this kind of power hitting panel. So that was one of my favorite moments.
Yeah, that's great. And the longtime listeners of Connected Consumer will have heard us talk about Matter a couple times for sure, and interoperability a couple times for sure. It's been a hot topic for the past year or so since it was announced, and has been delayed, unfortunately, until the fall. But it's going to continue to be discussed at all of our conferences, I guess, for the rest of the summer. And then once it launches, then we'll be talking about it as a launch. So it's going to be a around the clock Matter conversation that we're going to have to manage. Try and limit the amount of Matter related content we're putting out there in the world.
I will just say it was hard, and then I'll give it back. I promise, yeah. Chris. It's really hard for me not want to moderate the moderators, right? But I will say that while we're at Connection, Samsung actually announced Matter related news. So as we tried to move the conversation on, Samsung announced news in the morning saying, they've selected, I think, 10 initial brands that they were doing product testing with Matter. So showing a little bit more of a step towards some of these products coming out. And so as we were trying to move the conversation on, Samsung drew us right back in. So great to see a little bit more of a step forward. And it was fun that announcement happened while we were at the event, so we could all talk about it. Okay, back to you.
Right. Okay. All right. So thank you. For the listeners at home, Jen is my boss. So she's watching me. She's looking to rescue me. She's like, I'm not sure. Am I doing what Chris needs? I appreciate that. That's good looking out. But that was all good information. I wasn't looking to cut you off or anything like that. But I do also want to hear from Paul and Kristen. I want to share some of my experiences too. So Kristen, fortunately, because you have some different specialties, you didn't have to talk about Matter as much, or get to talk about Matter as much, I guess, depending on how you feel about it. So why don't you talk a little bit about the panels that you had after unmuting yourself?
So it's funny that you mentioned not having to talk about Matter. So when Jennifer sent out the text forbidding the use of the word, I was actually headed on stage to moderate the panel on MDUs, specifically smart apartment deployments.
Oh, I forgot you were on that panel. Yeah, it did come up a lot there. Yeah.
It did. I think avoided the M word, although the I word was still in use. So that is, of course, one of the big pain points in these deployments. Really, trying to cut down the complexity of how do you choose your vendor, how do you choose your product. So there's a lot of talking about that. Really for good reason. We're seeing, I think, a massive demand in smart apartments and smart MDUs. So
Yep.
a lot of consumers are very interested in it. I think we shared a data point saying that about half of renters are willing to pay an additional 5% for these types of solutions. The market right now, according to our data, is a little bit small. So only about 10% of renters report kind of having these pre-installed devices actively in their unit. So just given kind of the mismatch there, this much demand, this much supply, we do expect to see that market take off. So lots of companies are very excited about that. I think there's one of the big things coming out. So in addition to kind of doing the smart MDU panel, there was another very interesting panel that I moderated on senior tech and especially senior tech evolving out of some of the smart home platforms that we're seeing. So I think as smart home users age, they're going to need some additional services layered on. And of course, it makes sense that people would keep the devices already in their homes. I think lots of folks are excited about moving in that direction, especially given some of the big needs we're seeing and the massive cost of healthcare here in the U.S. market, at least. Jennifer also, I think, mentioned our workshop very early in the event. So I did get to present on some of the exciting things going on in the broadband space. Jennifer mentioned, I guess, stealing a little bit of my thunder, that we're seeing about 16 connected devices in consumers' households nowadays. If you're a smart home household, you have even more products. I think it's at least 24, I think, is the average for smart home households. And a lot, of course, have a great many more devices as well. So of course, when you have a lot of these devices in the home, all running on the Wi-Fi network primarily, you can expect a lot of Wi-Fi interruptions and service issues, and that becomes really the responsibility of your internet service provider, your router maker, to fix that. So it's kind of answering the question of how do ISPs kind of really help improve this service in their customers' homes. And we're seeing a lot of growth in mesh networking, a lot of growth in new gateway services to help improve performance in those areas, a lot of interest in whole home cybersecurity solutions as well, to kind of prevent those IoT devices in customers' households from maybe wreaking havoc on the rest of the network or even the ISP network as well. So lots of interesting things going on in the operator space.
Yeah, and just to clarify for the listeners, so Jen and I work in the smart home space most of the time. So we are focused on a particular list of products that we consider home devices, where Kristen and Paul are having a more expansive definition. So Kristen's 24 devices per is including a lot of other devices that go beyond. Right. So like Jen, you said 8 earlier, and that's because we're just talking about smart thermostats, smart door locks, a couple other specific smart home devices, and Kristen's including speakers and a bunch of other entertainment devices as well, right? So
Sure. There's
but
a lot of products in consumers' households that are connected to the internet. Of course, you've got your computers, you've got your smartphones, you've got your Wi-Fi printer. So just a lot of products people might never have thought about, but they're connected to the internet. They take up space on the network, and they do require some managing.
Yeah, that's
But
right.
go ahead.
And data going both directions too, right? So if you have a bunch of cameras and you're streaming video, there's potentially a ton of data going up and downstream from your home, and it can be a lot. We also talk a lot about how the perimeter of the home is becoming more included in the home in terms of security and safety and monitoring devices. And that's just going to continue to put more sort of stress and strain on your Wi-Fi setup, honestly, your deployment of your devices to make sure that it's reaching all of your kind of data heavy, your high data use, I should say, devices. So Paul, you didn't get to talk about as much of your cool connected entertainment stuff at this conference as you usually do, but we did put you to work. You had some panels. You listened to some keynotes. What did you think about your dipping your toe into the smart home conversation waters a little bit?
Well, I had 2 panels, and I guess the one that I'll discuss a little bit is the one that you mentioned some of my areas of specialty, which verges more into my territory, and the main panel that I wanted to maybe like drive some points out of was one looking at the connected entertainment and the smart home entertainment ecosystems, the integration of those two to drive the concept of whole home entertainment. right? Looking at how those two ecosystems will need to come together to drive this vision of whole home entertainment, so to speak, right? It's a bit of a industry term, and I think that it is an interesting crossover, right? Because a lot of these devices are being used uh, in some type of entertainment scenario. And obviously, speakers and smart displays are used for some entertainment scenarios, primarily listening to music. Also, the occasional, let's say, going through a recipe as you're cooking in the kitchen, if it's a smart display, but often also helping initiate, at least with smart speakers, an entertainment consumption scenario on a TV. Or it might be also used to turn lights on and off in your house, right? So there's a lot of crossover there because of the common points of control now, especially because you can initiate smart home commands from your TV's remote and so on. And so it's an interesting topic, and I think the two things I wanted to maybe pull from there that are an interesting contrast were that, from our consumer research, we've slowly been watching the penetration of smart TVs rise within U.S. broadband households, and now they're the most adopted streaming video device at 60% of households. But the more important thing is that it's also consumers' most favored primary video consumption device at home. And so really it has to be accepted, the smart TV, as just a reality of the modern connected home. And so you have to consider it as a reality and a centerpiece of any type of whole home entertainment concept that involves, connected home technology. And when we think about how TVs are used, right? I mean, it's great for potentially let me back up. It's great potentially for smart home usage just because newer TVs, they typically are addressable by a smart assistant or a voice assistant, if you will, or they're an input point for a voice assistant to control the rest of the home. But also, they're the biggest display in the house, right? So if you want to view cameras or you want to view any kind of status of all your different smart home devices, it's a huge display to do it on. Great, but when we think about how people acquire TVs, how they buy and sell them, or sorry, how they buy them at retail and how TVs are marketed, so much of it focuses on technical features, right? What's the cool new display technology? And some new iteration of voice control, or which different voice assistants are now integrated onto this TV, and all these really cool features in tech. But from Parks research, when we looked at smart TV features that are considered during the purchase process, all those individual technical features, they weren't the top thing that people consider, and values it. The consumers valued interoperability, compatibility, and ease of use within an ecosystem as the top scoring feature collectively at 32% of respondents. And so, notably higher than all others, uh, even voice control. And so they value this interoperability and the ease of working together, and just, consumers hate hassle more than they value point functionality or really cool, individual features. So, the takeaway there for any kind of whole home entertainment scenario where you've got smart home and entertainment ecosystems merging together to deliver this idealized vision, the magic there isn't going to be in, delivering cool features. It's basically in going to deliver these next generation experiences that crossover between the two ecosystems uh, without, friction or hassle to the consumer. The consumer shouldn't need to know how complex it is behind the scenes. But really, that is going to be where the magic is in this process, whether it's for integrators or it's for installers or whoever is pulling this off in the home, is delivering those experiences with minimum friction and hassle to the consumer. That is where the value is going to be that people will pay for.
Paul, something that I thought was really interesting on one of your panels, a lot of talk about kind of the TV as kind of something that a lot of consumers were interested in using as that control interface to the smart home. And we're seeing a lot of TV makers start to incorporate that type of functionality, the smart hub functionality. But it didn't seem that builders as a whole were very interested in integrating any of the devices going into homes, into these televisions.
Yeah, that's a difficult one. Just because you build it doesn't mean people are going to think it's useful, right? And that's either from the consumer perspective or from the industry. And so I don't know if that's a function of just more collaboration and outreach is needed, or they need to really talk more to the builders and to others on the industry side to, if for nothing else, then to give them, SDKs and to give them, documentation and how they integrate into it. But from what I've seen, I may be wrong, but I think from what I've seen, a lot of these smart home interfaces, they're basically just, taking, for example, some of the concepts from Google and Apple. From what you can see, for example, if you pull up the Google Home app right on your phone, and you can see the status of all your devices, uh, I haven't seen so far that these concepts have delivered that much more richness in that smart TV experience versus just graphically throwing up all the same info that you already get in your smartphone app, right? Visually to see all the statuses of what lights are on and what the temperature is. And so I think that, if that's all they're doing, then it's a rhetorical question. Are they really leveraging that big screen experience to deliver something more that has bite, right? That people want to use, and that, for example, the industry side feels a need to take advantage of, right? I mean, how are they delivering something more compelling on that big screen? Uh, and if they're not, then it's just easier for somebody to pick up their phone, for example, if it
Yeah.
happens to be nearby. So I think that that's still a developing equation. People know that, I mean, the industry knows, yes, this is a huge screen. There's huge potential there, to really leverage it, because we know people are in front of it a lot at home. At least it's the main entertainment device at home. Will people actually flock to that as their big smart home control or display interface, or to view all the cameras? I don't know what that equation is, right? How do you drive them there, and how do you get the industry to accept it and really start making the experience greater, bigger, richer? I don't know. We'll see. I think it's both sides have to kind of come together and figure out how they make the best use of that space.
I mean, smart TVs are more widely adopted than smart speakers now, so they
Right.
certainly have to figure it out at some point.
Right. And we see, and I'll get one last thing in here. I think we still see the TV industry experimenting with far field control, like whether they have it in the remote or building it into the bezel, right? I think the latest manufacturer to experiment with that would be Amazon in their Omni series of smart TVs, where they built, I believe, Alexa voice control always on into the bezel, right? Microphones in the bezel. And so potentially they're, a usable control interface for ambient computing, right? Just speaking the commands out loud versus picking up a remote and having to speak in a remote after you press a button.
Right.
And so maybe they potentially can be leveraged for that, but I know the TV industry has always been 50-50 on whether that's usable, just because the TV is usually such a far distance from person during the viewing scenario, where there's so much potential for other noise, kids yelling, dogs, everything else, to interfere with the accuracy of that voice pickup. So I don't know ultimately, what will happen there, but definitely they're going to be ever present, and voice control and smart assistants are going to be ever present on those smart TVs. So uh, I think they can be leveraged in some way to be a control point for the smart home.
It's interesting that it kind of cuts both ways, where the benefit of the big screen being a central focus of the family, everyone being around, means that they can all sort of consume the content together. So you could all, as a family, I guess, if this is a real use case, that's a good idea. All look at your security cameras together, or all work on the lighting together. Like, I'm not sure what the benefit of that is, but you definitely have the downside of trying to work some plans with where you're putting your mic arrays, and how to have the language software be able to interpret commands versus just ambient conversation and stuff. I mean, smart speakers have done a lot of this work, but not all manufacturers are going to have access to the best sort of underlying technology there. Something else that's kind of going on too, that I think it's kind of interesting, I feel like I was hearing this at Distributech last week, is a conversation about, the focal point of the home is the kitchen. So a lot of people have smart speakers in the kitchen, but people have decided not to use those as their smart home controller necessarily. But hey, what about smart fridges? We're going to put giant, there's a generation of fridges from Samsung and LG and some other new entrants as well that are going to have huge displays and a bunch of computing power. So that's going to be another contender. And then also from all of my EV nerds that I talk to, everyone also would argue, hey, what if you want to control your home from the car? There's going to be huge displays in everyone's cars going forward. So why not, set the scene before you arrive home, do a lot of and plus everyone, I guess, wants to manage their smart home while they drive around, because we're always looking for new things to do while we're supposed to be concentrating on driving. So so it's going to be great when everyone is making sure their AC is ready for them to get home and things like that when they're supposed to be paying attention. But I guess that's where assisted driving and autonomous driving can come in. So speaking of EVs, we got to have an energy panel at Connections, which is exciting for me. In addition to being the host of this podcast, I'm also the subject matter expert on energy at Parks. So we've had the Smart Energy Summit and got to all get together and talk about energy a lot to kind of each other. The energy audience is all very on board with a lot of terms and concepts and has kind of agreed to some extent what's going to happen in the future with energy, and then kind of the solutions and what happens next is where all the discussion happens. But the Connections audience wasn't necessarily as on board. People are appropriately focused on what's going on in their verticals and things like that. So I got to have a lot of interesting conversations with people after our energy panel where people were sort of surprised and hearing some of these ideas for the first time about the rise of smart energy devices as a result of rising energy costs. And what I always like to throw around is our 16% purchase intent we're looking at right now for EVs over the next 12 months. And it's actually that's just among greenfield buyers. It goes up to 20% if you include existing EV owners. So there's a lot of people who are looking to buy EVs. The EV companies are obviously struggling to get all the components they need and get everything exported from where it's being produced and things like that. Have everything assembled and actually getting the cars out to the lot is currently a problem. But someday, all of this built up purchase intent and customer interest is going to result in a lot of people having EVs in the home. And again, to Jen's point earlier about trying not to go off on a long monologue, I would give you a very long monologue about the paradigm shift of the energy landscape that we're all facing as consumers coming up here. But the short version is people are going to care a lot more about their energy costs, are going to start looking at their bill in more than a cursory way, are going to start caring more about a line by line level of information about how load is being created by the devices in your home when your energy bill goes way up, because energy costs are up and because an EV can be almost as much as your HVAC system in terms of energy use if you're charging at home on a regular basis. So when everyone's energy bill is huge and they don't have gas prices to cry about anymore, they can focus on just their one electricity bill. Then everyone will be looking for solutions. And it was great to have our paradigm shift energy panel. We had people representing both energy providers and device makers, both for residential and for, I should say, single family home and multifamily residential. Smart thermostats are still important because that's the big lever that you need to control HVAC. So we had some representation of the thermostat game, even though smart thermostats in general we kind of think of as being flat, and we're kind of waiting for the next moment to come. So maybe that's going to be part of the shift after we have EVs, increased consumption, better reporting going on in terms of consumers being able to look on their phone and see how much energy the refrigerator is using versus their HVAC versus their EV charging setup. And people will start evaluating things differently. So it was great to talk about that. So in addition to the panels that we've been talking about, we also had keynote speakers. The leader of Sonova was one of them, and she talked about the sort of new benefits, new opportunities in the coming kind of growth of home solar. And that was really interesting to kind of hear her specific perspective. What I really like is that at Sonova, they talk about the adaptable home. The way that we talk about the smart home as kind of the dream of what kind of the end of this technology could be if you had it all integrated and deployed correctly. If you have all of your energy devices working for your home in terms of energy generation from solar, potentially storage as well, and then a good control method through your phone and good understanding, good education, then you can have a home that's adaptable to climate change issues, changing energy costs, on a daily and yearly basis, and just overall more adaptable to the changing needs of energy. Kristen was talking about how much Wi-Fi we need, but energy consumption is also going to continue to go up. So we need to make sure that it's available and controllable. So I was excited. Did you guys have anything you wanted to mention about any of the other keynotes?
First, I want to say that I love the energy topic too, and I hope all those people that you talked about in the networking later that were like, oh, I wasn't aware of this energy story you're talking about Smart Energy Summit, because we're talking about this all the time, and Smart Energy Summit, and I learned so much from the speakers there. The fact that Sunovo spoke was also so important because they have a partnership with Brinks. And we're seeing this huge overlap between the security ecosystem and the energy ecosystem. So ADT, just in the past year, bought SunPro Solar, and they've rolled out ADT Solar. Vivint is back in the solar game. Sunnova and Brinks are partnered. And when we look at our own data, home security system owners strongly over-index in solar ownership already. It's the same target market, right? So we have 17% of security system owners tell us that they have solar panels today versus only 3% of those without a home security system. So the ability to see these ecosystems coming together is really interesting. And then my other keynote, I was going to say that I really liked, well, I loved everybody. But
You love all
on
your
the
children
energy
the same.
side,
Yeah.
I love all my children the same. Yeah. So on the energy side, we had Madison Saab, who leads builder relationships for Alarm.com. And she had a fireside chat with Elizabeth, if you remember, on the third day. And she talked a lot about how builders, one of the things that they're really focused on is building net zero ready homes, right? And so even if the home buyer is not building the home with solar or with storage or with an EV charger, that the infrastructure is there to add those items later. And that insulation and the windows and the building envelope are so efficient, right? That you're starting with a whole new crop of homes, right? That can get us to this very energy efficient future. So I loved the conversation with Madison. And then I had one other favorite keynote, and then I'll pass it back to you, which was David Puckett, who's the vice president of connectivity at Comcast. And he gave a really interesting talk because, the reality is the connectivity coming into the home and the home network is the foundation of everything else that the smart home's built on, right? If you don't have connectivity, the smart home's not going anywhere, really. And looking at the evolution of broadband deployments and what the ISPs really went through and what Comcast went through in the incredible increase in network usage during the pandemic, and also the shifts in time that people were using their network were totally different, and everything that they had to do. And the thing that really stuck with me is he shared something with, I think it was 20 years ago, when Comcast had increased speeds from an average of 3 megabits per second to 7 or 8. I mean, something minuscule that today we probably wouldn't even consider broadband, right? And this journalist asked Comcast, I mean, that's great that you can achieve these speeds, but what in the world are consumers going to use it for? This is going to be completely unused capacity. Great job, guys. And so Comcast just announced, the types of multi-gigabit speeds that they can reach today. And they got the same question from a totally different journalist 20 years later. Well, great that you're giving all this speed, but what is everybody going to use it for? And the answer is kind of the same 20 years ago as it was today, which is, that's not for us as an ISP to decide. We give it, and the creators of this world are going to determine what that extra speed and capacity are going to be used for. And I was like, ooh, chills. I see it coming. It was fun. So I really love that message too.
It was really good. His sort of presentation of what the work they were doing during 2020, when all those changes were happening in terms of load and all that stuff was impressive. And he really did, he made ISPs sound heroic, which is not something, I spent a lot of years studying NPS and customer satisfaction scores, and I'm not sure that I wasn't ready to start thinking of ISPs as heroic, but I mean they did a lot of essential work in terms of making it so that we could stay connected with our family members and continue working. Those of us who were in roles where we were able to, what do we say, deliver digital content? Is that how we deliver? How do we phrase it? I forget. Something like that. It was like deliverables were in digital form, so that's how you're able to work
Yeah.
online only during
It's
lockdown.
it's almost like when you have something that becomes a necessity and becomes a utility, right? They become taken for granted in your
Yeah.
everyday, and so any issues with that become major issues in people's lives, right? And so it's no longer like I'm going to delight the consumer with great customer experience. It's like you've become a necessity and you better not mess it up. And ISP NPS scores are forever in the basement, but I mean they're providing a very real utility to society at this point.
That's right. So Kristen,
Yeah.
first of all, ISPs or internet is the fourth utility, right? And also, just to kind of wrap up, let us know if there's anything else that you want to share from Connections, and also anything that you're working on that you want the listening audience to be looking out for.
Sure. So I guess I can say that so we do track ISP NPS kind of trending. One of the wildest things that I've seen is how it has gone positive during the pandemic, and it has remained positive. So it is at a multi-decade high right now. Everyone is very happy with their internet service provider, and that's not something you used to be able to say.
Yeah.
I don't
They were
know
a bit of a
about very
punchline in my space.
happy, but it's like
Relatively happy.
it's gone right compared to where they usually feel about their ISP. They're pretty good. It's like at a historic happy-ish place.
They're much happier than they used to be. So
Yes, definitely. Just an achievement.
So Kristen, plug your stuff. Tell me about reports that are by Kristen Hanich that people should be looking for. What socials do you want people to contact you on or not contact you? Maybe you want to be left alone. That's up to you.
So we've done, I'd say, a lot of research looking at the broadband space this year. I'm just finishing up one of our quantified consumer decks, so smart product market assessment, looking at the home networking space and some of the changes we're seeing there. And again, kind of looking at the NPS impact of different services coming off of routers and gateways. I think that's very interesting research,
Cool.
potentially to lots of folks. Later in the year, I'm going to be doing kind of a long form written report looking at all of the changes going on in the broadband space, including some of the huge kind of demand here of MDUs and bulk internet, and lots of very exciting things going on. So very much looking forward to that.
Awesome. I'm interested in reading that too. I didn't know you were digging into NPS. That's exciting. Paul, how about you? What do you have going on?
Sure. Well, I guess I'll plug one thing that just published and another thing that'll be on the way, which are dashboards, right? So abbreviated looks at particular markets or market segments, with all the leading indicators and, big picture data points and trend information. So it just published the Q1 2022 video services dashboard. So look at all the streaming video services and OTT versus traditional pay TV and so on, and looking at how those markets are moving and how service adoption is going, and the nature of how the business models are, the different types of business models are being adopted across OTT. And so that's the video services dashboard that's already published. And then coming up in a few weeks or in a month, by the time it's published, the Q1 2022 consumer electronics dashboard will also be on the way. And that's looking, of course, at consumer electronics as an industry, the types of devices that are growing or not growing at the moment. And certainly, I think smart TVs will be very prominently featured there. But look at all the different devices, particularly connected devices in the home. And it's a great overview, and I can't wait to dive into it.
Awesome, Paul. You're supposed to plug yourself too. Say your Twitter handle or something.
Oh, okay. Well, my Twitter handle is Paul Erickson, ERICKSON AV on Twitter. So Paul Erickson AV.
All right. Jen, is there anything I missed about Connections that you want to bring up? And what do you have coming out that you're excited about?
Connections is great. We have more virtual sessions throughout the year. So if anybody missed us in person, certainly join us virtually, and then come to the in-person one next year. And also we do the Connection Summit at CES. So I know a lot of Connected Consumer podcast listeners probably go to CES. So we have that one-day summit there. So it's the next Connected Home related in-person event to find us at. What do we have coming up? We have so much coming up. We have our ongoing trackers where there's so much that happens in the smart home and security spaces from the industry side. There's so many different brands across different product categories that are making announcements constantly. So please, check out our quarterly reviews of what's happening in the industry. Kind of an odd shout out that I wanted to give was we did some really fantastic, when I say we, I mean Kristen primarily, with me supporting her, did some fantastic research with Nokia on roadblocks to Industry 4.0 and released a custom report with them. And so that is publicly available and can be looked at. And I had the opportunity to do a podcast. I don't know if this is breaking a podcast rule to talk about another podcast on a podcast, but Nokia has a podcast called the Real Conversations Podcast by Nokia. So I got an opportunity to chat with their podcasters about the roadblocks to Industry 4.0. So you may know us from our consumer research, but we do also kind of reach out to the adjacencies and everything that's happening in emerging tech. So that was super interesting. And Chris, how about you? What do you got coming out? I know what you have coming out. You tell everybody else.
Very kind of you.
You
That's
got
right, because you're my boss, Right. So I am currently literally today, wrapping up a big look at the smart home buyer's journey. We take a look at how people are making purchasing decisions, and something that came up actually during Connections. We had a conversation about channel, and we had someone from Home Depot, and we had some manufacturers on there, and we were talking about how a pattern that we're seeing, and we have some data around this now, shows that people do a lot of their info gathering online, and then the final most influential moment they have is an in-person encounter in the stores. So it's interesting to look at that. I kind of the power of in-person retail kind of coming back as people are willing to go shopping out in stores again. We'll see how that goes in the looming recession. That was also a topic of a lot of conversations, more somber conversations at Connections. So we'll see how that goes with the economy. But for now, I have a lot of information about how people are doing their shopping and they're deciding about smart home products. So all the players in the space should be looking for that from me. Also, in terms of coming up next and this, and something also I'm working on, I'm kind of excited about, is continuing the Technicolor Smart Spaces podcast series. We're going to be talking about, I think, senior care facilities next, maybe CNI also in the next one. So keep an eye on this stream. Be sure that you like, subscribe, leave comments. All that stuff helps us kind of get the word out, and allows me to argue to Jen and also to the people at the top that this is a good use of my time, because I like it and I want to keep doing it, and they would maybe rather have me writing reports that they can sell, but whatever. I want to keep doing the podcast. It's great. Me and Rosie have a good time. So I'm at C White Insights on Twitter. Rosie is at Rosie Olpino on Twitter. Please also follow at Parks Associates, and check out Elizabeth Parks on LinkedIn. She puts out a lot of free content on there for reading. Nice little sort of 5-minute reads that have some good data points in there that we're sharing, that are nice teasers for some of our larger products. But it's a good way to kind of keep up on some of the news and also find out what we're working on. So keep an eye on all those things. Thank you to my teammates for joining me, Jennifer, Kristen, and Paul. I really appreciate your time. And I will be talking to you about work stuff. And goodbye to everyone on the podcast. Bye. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye. Thanks, Chris.